separation of black people and separation. It seems to me that that's a false dichotomy that can be set up in terms of the way they discuss. The real issue I feel for black people is one of empowerment and one of redefinition of the way in which black and white people are interacting in society. I feel that's what we must be about.
Well, I think that if you consider the fact that this system, this capitalist system under which we're living today is designed in such a way that nobody except a privileged few can attempt to express themselves or contribute to anything, there's no doubt about the fact that we have to talk about revolutionizing the system before anybody can live in any kind of human fashion together. I would just like to point out the fact that I have seen with my eyes societies where people of different colors have learned how to live together, each maintaining their own cultural identity, but each fighting to build and to continue to construct a social revolution together. I was in Cuba not very long ago, and I saw with my own eyes how black people, brown people, and white people have reached the point where they can work in harmony towards the building of the socialist society.
Any other responses? Add to what Brother Ron said over there just a moment ago. I think the key question that certainly is a good idea to work toward a total input by all I suppose ethnic groups in our society, blacks and what have you. The key thing is whether or not you have a sufficient amount of power within yourself to affect the system when the system is working against your vested interest. In school some years ago, we were taught to think of America as a melting pot. And I think the current administration has proven that there are ethnics who are unmelted, because even though they are invisible, they are still there to identify with their own vested interest as a people. I think as black people, we've got to become concerned, first of all, with what our vested interest is in either preserving the system or changing the system. And once we make that determination, then the direction that we have to take is clear for us. For instance, if you look at the various arms or branches of government, they represent different interests. Yet there is none that represents our interest. The business interest is represented by a branch. You will never find that branch, going contrary to what the interest of business happens to be. Yet there's the labor interest. And only here lately have we found some differences there. But every segment of our society that represents a power, level is represented there, except people, and particularly black people. And I think we should be about the business of coming together, not in specifics as to what our interests and goals are, but certainly in generality in terms of what we need to exist in this society.
Let me ask a question about your comment. Would it be correct to infer from your comments that you would suggest some attachment of a power mechanism for black people to the governmental apparatus as a solution to the empowerment of black people?
I think what I'm getting at is the acquired power within the black people themselves to affect the system in any way it needs to be affected in order to produce on behalf of the interests of black people. I'm not saying we should have a black agency. That's not what I was trying to tell. I understand that every other ethnic group in our society has, by some means or other, acquired the power to move out of their depressed or oppressed situation, with the exception of black and brown. I think what I'm saying is that whatever that power has to be to move the government or move the local structure, that's what we need to be about. And I think that the vested interest to be the basis of our movement.
America really is an ethnic society. And I live here in New York now, though I come from Texas, and New York has always been talked about as a melting pot. It really isn't a melting pot. We have Jews, we have Italians, we have blacks, we have Puerto Ricans, a variety of other cultures that live side by side with each other, not always happy with each other. But if we're talking about change, whether it's a change of the style of the government or an absolute change in the nature of the government, or social society, whatever other society, I think the thing that is fundamental to it, if we as black people are going to talk about change, one of the first things we need to do is develop some unity within ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean that all black people have to speak the the same language, I have the same philosophy. But we have to learn to communicate, and I think we are, in a large measure, learning to communicate with each other. And we've got to develop coalitions with others, because we are a small minority. We have great power, however, if we can unite our minority with other minorities, because there are other groups of people who would wish to move in the same direction as we wish. So it doesn't make me any difference whether we're going, if I thought tomorrow we could stage the revolution and the revolution would succeed, I would give leadership to it. That is a revolution by whatever method. But at this structure in our development, I believe the kind of revolution that is going to take place is a social revolution without bloodshed. And if this is to be so, one of the first things that must be accomplished is that Black people, poor people, must unite themselves and join forces with us.
Now, Harlem has been a barometer for a number of years, perhaps Black feeling across the country in terms of mood. What do you see, what direction do you see the mood in Harlem going in?
I'm not too sure that Harlem has been the mood of the country. Harlem is one of the most volatile places in the country. When I travel to other places, I'm amazed at the amount of unity. We have unity in Harlem, unity in one thing, that we're different. Many of us are different. We have more nationalist organizations. We have all of the organizations you want to perceive of, many of them have their facets in Harlem. No, I don't think Harlem is the mood. Harlem is a very sophisticated place. Sophisticated in the sense that we all understand the need for others of us to exist. So I could not use it as the barometer of America. But if it should be the barometer of America, I think it would be good. But I'm afraid that it is not.
Mrs. Hamer, do you see changes in, since you're from right in the middle of the rural South, do you see any trend there in terms of Black people moving toward unity, moving away from unity? Just generally what is going on in your area of the country?
Well, I do see more unity because the power structures in the South are forcing us to have more unity. You know, there's been a class split with the Black community. That's being moved because we are finding out whether you middle class or low class is no different. As long as we Black, we in the same boat. And that's forcing us to be together. Because, you know, we've seen what is happening in our schools. You know, like if a principal was a principal and was moved and become assistant principal, his job, if he's Black, automatically, if he becomes assistant principal, his job automatically is to carry politician from one school to the other one and load up the bus. So he's finding that it's no different in us, and it's forcing us to get together. And I think that the change will come because we have to, it's nothing handed to us on the civil side, and we have to work together for a change in this side.
Congressman Stokes, did your election as the new chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus indicate a new direction? And if it did not, is there a new direction for the Congressional Black Caucus?
Well, what we had to do immediately after I assumed chairmanship was to try and evaluate our role. We found ourselves at that time being 13 Black legislators of a body of 435 congressmen, and having formed a Black caucus for the purpose of trying to alleviate the conditions under which poor and Black and disadvantaged people live in this country. We had to try and evaluate that role in terms of 1973 and the United States Congress, particularly in light of the present administration in Washington. As we evaluated our role, we realized that we sort of grew up overnight, and we immediately tried to be all things to all people. And for a period of 18 months, we conducted a series of conferences, a series of hearings around points of interest and concern to Black and disadvantaged people in this country. And after we had developed all of the hearings and the conferences, we realized we had a great deal of data collected, a great deal of proposed legislative solutions. And so we realized that we ought to get out of the business of conducting conferences and hearings, because we had the data, we had the specifics with which to work and propose legislation which would get at some of the solutions to some of these problems. So consequently, we decided that we would try and make the emphasis of the caucus that of a legislative thrust, that is to add a black perspective to that legislation coming through the United States Congress, particularly in light of our work on committee. We can fashion amendments to legislation before it even comes to the floor that would add a black perspective to that kind of legislation. And so it's with this kind of a emphasis or thrust that the Black Caucus attempted to change this direction.
I'd like to ask either Mr. Williams and or Mr. Williams, since the National Association of Black Social Workers is definitely interested in services for Black people, poor people, and the Urban League is definitely in the business of institutionalizing services. How do you see the recent budget proposal or the appropriations for these service programs affecting Black America, specifically during the summer months and on into the years?
The way I view it, the current Nixon administration policy is creating or will create a critical condition in the Black community. They're cutting back on key services in the area of daycare, welfare, scholarship for students to attend school. Many students will not be able to attend the open school enrollment program, etc. But even more importantly, currently in the Black community, despite the statistics that have been projected by the Nixon administration, see, we made a survey in both Harlem and Watts, and we came up with these statistics that something like 40 to 50% of Blacks that are unemployed at this particular time right now. Now, with the current cutback, this is going to create even more unemployment. In fact, some statistics have already been thrown out by some of the Black groups. There's something like 200 or 300,000 Black people working in the poverty program will be affected, that are currently employed, that will be affected by these job cuts. So this is only compounding the current unemployment situation that currently exists now in the Black community. So I think that we are now past the repression stage. We're in a critical point, but not only does this exist in Harlem and Watts, it exists throughout the major urban areas in the
Brown
state.
sugar,
And I think that
apple cider
Black
vinegar,
people are
salt.
going to have to begin to speak out against this current trend because it's having a drastic effect on the Black community.
Well, trying to respond to the same question, but we do regard the budget cuts as disastrous. And not only in terms of the actual dollars, but the type of philosophy that these cuts have unveiled. That we're talking, well, let's just deal with the low-income housing programs. We have to admit that some of those programs did not work. But some of those programs did not work because they were fraud involving government agencies, involving the private sector of the country. So what happens, the programs are cut out and the poor people are penalized. In other words, that we are being victimized because someone else has victimized us. And the whole question of the cuts deals with the type of philosophy that says the country has done enough for poor people, so now we'll move on to something else. That we can abolish poverty with the stroke of a pen. And so therefore, that these programs are no longer needed. And anyone that needs these programs are really freeloaders whom we can do without. So we deal not only with the question of dollar amounts, but the question of the type of philosophy that's trying to, or that is being exemplified in this type of approach to the budget. So I think that that's the main thing.
Thank you.
Point about the whole budget cutback thing and research. I think, again, we see a rather magnificent key argument being done by the Nixon administration. Because the nation as a whole assumes that the cuts that are taking place are one to eliminate Black people from the rolls, from the welfare rolls, to make life easier for the taxpayers out in the hinterland. But if you really track the statistics and see exactly who is benefiting from the program that goes down, you will find that generally 2/3 of the people who receive benefits are white and the other 1/3 being Black. In terms of those who are receiving direct public aid or public assistance, you will find that the number increases to something like 1 out of 4. And I'm not a social worker, but just the pure and simple numbers indicate that. What has happened is that out in the Midwest, where it's becoming acceptable now to assume that discrimination is a way of life, the administration has convinced people that what we're doing is keeping your taxes down, keeping those programs, we're taking those programs out rather that have contributed to inflation and all this other foolishness. I think what we have to do, and I think there's a tragedy that some of the so-called liberals who have participated in these discussions before are not speaking out on the issue now, but it's being left to black leadership to deal with the whole question of budget cutbacks. And I think that there's a real need to raise the level of awareness across the country, because we got some black folks who are talking about, yeah, well, we should be phasing down these things. Phasing down got nothing to do with it. If you cut back on the social program at the same time increase the defense budget, when we're supposed to be winding down our involvement in Southeast Asia, there's something out of balance there. And
Tony, I don't think, let me just piggyback what Bill Lucy said. No, we should not have a discussion. There should never be a discussion of welfare without some explanation to the public of what welfare really is. Lockheed is getting welfare. People who live in the suburbs, Penn Central is getting welfare.
we pay taxes.
Pardon me?
We pay taxes.
Exactly. We pay taxes. They're not only getting welfare, but not paying any taxes. But when they get it, it is called a subsidy. And of course, we could go along and give a really description for all of the things that are being done by our federal government, both here in America and abroad, that are in fact welfare. But Mr. Nixon and his crew are not talking about eliminating any of that. They're talking about expanding that.
Well, let me ask this. In his explanation, as far as he's gone today, President Nixon, when he appeared on television and explained the Watergate situation as he saw it, did you sense that he was implying a reordering, a restructuring of priorities? And when he discussed, didn't he say something to the effect that he was going to be a little more sensitive?
And you want to know what I sensed? I sensed that there was a desperate man trying to cop a plea. And then he even said a prayer for us at the end of it. No, I didn't sense that he was talking about reordering priorities. I sensed that he was trying to get through a very bad night.
And I think also that he never really got to the substance of what he was dealing with. And what we got was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of waving of the flag. And then he was supposed to go like dealing with what he's just going to disappear. And I think that it was unfair treatment for the American public.
You know,
It's one thing, I'm sorry, it's one thing, that is the only president in the history of my time, and I'm 56, that can talk an hour and never say nothing.
But we also have to ask ourselves what the real meaning of that Watergate affair is. I think it's important, especially for those of us who are here this afternoon, to recognize that if the Republican Party will go that far to sabotage the Democratic Party, to sabotage that kind of opposition, what have we already been experiencing insofar as repression is concerned, and what will we as Black people have to face in the future? Because there are many of us who feel that not only the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party as well is committed to upholding a system of exploitation and racism. If you look at the McGovern campaign, McGovern didn't even raise the question of racism, and he was supposed to be the far left wing of the Democratic Party. So I think it's important to see this Watergate scandal as being an indication of the real threat of fascism.
I think that's what it is an indication of the lawlessness of law officials and the abuses of state power at the highest level. You have to take it beyond a particular example, as David said, Watergate, to understand what's going on at all levels in our society as far as uses of power of the government is concerned, particularly in political areas. If they're doing this against the established opposition, what are they doing against Black people? What are they doing against political activists? What is happening if statutes are being passed and the people who are being appointed to the courts, decisions the courts are making? What's happening at the street level in terms of the administration of justice? Then you get the full impact of just how lawless these people are, who are supposed to be in charge of the mainstream of the world. When you look at the statutes that Congress is passing, the detention, see the no-knock, see the stop and frisk, you see the Interstate Riot Act. You look at the Supreme Court of the United States consistently cutting back upon what we regard as traditional rights in this country, doing away with the nine-unanimous jury. You look at the street level, the level of violence, officially sanctioned violence that's going on in this country, political implications of that. Look at what happened at Kent State, at Orangeburg, Jackson State, Southern University, at Attica, where 43 people were killed. You look at the way in which the grand jury is being used, you look at the way in which agents provocateurs are being used, and you just trace it all the way through what we see and
Look at
Watergate is
Wounded
just
Knee
the
right
top
now.
of the iceberg.
Look at what's happening in Wounded Knee right this moment.
I think we could talk for an hour and a half if we were to expand this point.
I would like to,
American people, have the responsibility for what is going on now. Because, the Democrats are just alarmed of the bug.
I didn't put on charger last night, so.
Democrats, when they were in power, they were voting for the black movement. And no one made any kind of outcry about that. The only thing now, the chickens come off the roof. They're now that they're being infected, they are now beginning to do the outcry. We've been crying about that for years, about the invading of our privacy, the bugging, the doing something black movement, the bug Martin Luther King is well known, and no one spoke out against it. So what is happening now? See, it has been a revelation of what has been going on for years. And I think that the American people now are becoming more aware of what is going on. Now the fact of what they're going to do. Deal with it. But I think that we can go back to another point also.
Well, you know, I'm just posting right now on my page.
Has around him. I mean, if he has, let's say, crooks around him that who only have their vested interest at heart and not going to commit the time and the energy that is necessary to design programs to deal with blacks. So we are never going to get the kind of response from the federal government that we need. And I think this is very important because these fellows up there are more concerned about stashing suitcase full of money. In fact, there's $2 million and $4 million that they're stashing away now. That money can be going into the black community to help them deal with some of the problems. And I think that until we begin to focus on these kind of situations, that's where we're going to be missing many of the basic points.
So you and
I yield to the other statement, my other brother, business sector.
One of the things that I keep hearing here, I think you have to agree with me that the capitalistic system in America is the system that we have to deal with. The problem is that we don't have any blacks operating. I wonder if we would have the same kind of feeling about capitalistic system. We were capitalist, somebody else was sitting outside. I think we would begin there. I think that, well, Stoker says he'd be against it, and that's what I think.
As long as he's doing the exploiting, there's something basically wrong.
It's difficult, really, to say that people haven't been damaged by free and press. The failure of our city probably a direct result of the failure of free enterprise. The big business begins to move out, leave the poor people to solve the problem of poor people, and you've got
wait a minute, I'm sorry.
All right.
You can't talk about free enterprise because there's no such thing as free enterprise. Capitalism in this day and age is monopoly capitalism. It is controlled by multi-billion-dollar firms, multinational firms. It's controlled by the people like Rockefeller and Hughes and DuPont. Now, there's a real difference between those folks and the black men and women who decide to open up a business on the court. That is not capitalism. But Richard Nixon has been trying to go against that. But all we have to do is to get a little grocery store around the corner, and then all of a sudden you've got capitalism.
Well, if that's what Richard Nixon says, and I disagree with him, I'm not interested in small business and that kind of those constructs because it's amazing. Director, national interpreter, they're all black. White ones all American. White ones all American. I don't know how that happens.
That's because we know how that's the.
Right. The point I make is when I look down from an airplane and I see each one of us as organizations here protecting our services, what the heck, we are protecting our turf, it's their turf. We don't have any turf. So if we don't finally come together to get a piece of deep turf, then we aren't gonna have any turf to protect. And I think that it's possible if we begin to talk about ways of changing that.
Stokely, and then,
I think that the real question is that people are not clear on capitalism, because capitalism is a very vicious system. But what it does is it embroiders its viciousness with all sorts of elusive terms. For example, many of us would support capitalism because we actually believe that in a capitalist system, there's a chance for us to get the same amount of money Rockefeller gets, because we're told that under capitalism there is equality of opportunity. So that we feel that if this year we didn't make as much as Rockefeller made, then we got to work a little bit harder. Next year we're gonna make it. But if we carefully examine a capitalist system, we will see that it's based on exploitation, because the viciousness of capitalism, and the reason why once black people examine we can never be for it, is that under a capitalist system, the fruits of those who labor are enjoyed by somebody else. That is, those who do the laboring, the fruits of their labor, they don't enjoy it. As a matter of fact, we could say under capitalism that the fruits of the labor of the toiling masses are enjoyed by those who do not labor. And again, as black people, we have clear examples of it. If we were to get the fruits of our labor from slavery, just from slavery, all we got to do is go to Nixon and say, hey, look, you give us the fruits of our labor from slavery and we forget the score. We would be the richest people in the country again, because under capitalism, the individual exploits the labor of the people. Now, people get confused because this is a capitalist system and it's a developed system, it's a technological system. So they combine capitalism with technology and development, and they think that there is no other possible way to develop this rapid terms of development without going through the capitalist route. But certainly we have examples that show the opposite of that. China is a clear example of that. Cuba is, North Korea, North Vietnam. These countries certainly in Africa, where countries have chosen the socialist path, such as Tanzania, Guinea, Congo, Brazzaville, Algeria, we see that there is another way to develop and get the same type of things we have under the capitalist system, but in a system that does not exploit each other, where all of us work and the fruits of our labor are divided evenly. Let me show you how backward capitalism is. Here's the backward system. We can make two statements about capitalism to show how backward it is. About America. America is a capitalist country. It's thoroughly capitalist. It's an imperialist country. We can say that number one, America is the most technologically advanced country in the world. That's an undeniable fact. It's a truism. America is the most scientifically developed country in the world. And right under that, we could say a second fact. To show you how backward America is. We could say that America, in 1945, made for her people better cars than she does in 1973. If you analyze this, you see how vicious the system is, because there's America with its great technological skills, its great scientific ability, and rather than making a safe car for people in the last 20 years, which they can do with the scientific knowledge that's at their fingertips, they rather take this knowledge and build a car which will break down every 2 years, so you're forced to buy another car. Because you see, under capitalism, what they do is they take their scientific skills, and rather than using it for the benefit of the people, they use it to further exploit the people. And so this type of system is still backward.
I think Nelson,
I concur with the position that Brother Carmack has taken with regards to the system of capitalism. But really, I think there are two fundamental questions that we need to get into. The first one was suggested when we started, like what is possible within the context of this system and the coming together of people and that type of thing. Which I think as we begin to hear the things that people are saying about capitalism, it tends to start to answer that question. I mean, as we see the very construction of this thing. But see, to me, the most important question, well, let me put it this way. I think that we have to talk, one, about the merits of capitalism, which is what a lot of the conversation has been expended on so far. But secondly, and very importantly, is once we begin to see that picture, we have to raise the question of how it is that we work within the framework of our existence in a capitalist system that we, I think, can agree that we oppose, at least some of us can. And then we get down to the nitty-gritty of the question that Ms. Hamer spoke to about whether we're moving towards unity, the question of coalition, the question of the dynamics of day-to-day work on real problems that affect us as a people. See, because we could hem and haw all day about capitalism and talk about how bad it is. Obviously, it's bad. If you could tell me the 10 worst things in the world, I could tell you that they have been increasing in this country in the last 5 or 6 years. To give you some idea of the direction that this system that people are talking about is taking. I mean, the priorities are insane. There's no sane way of saying that people, should take care of people, that people should take care of sick people. I mean, things just happen based again on the way the system is set up. And so I think that that's, pretty clear. The second thing is the idea of how we work in unity. See, it's my notion that we have to take a second look at this question of unity, because I'm not convinced that it's all that much unity taking place in the Black community today. In fact, what you see on the one hand is a uniting of certain people who are beginning to agree on a direction to take. And at the same time, you're seeing the uniting of Black people who are taking another direction. I mean, within the context of this system and within the context of our own community. And in fact, you talk about the people being confused. Well, a lot of times the people wouldn't be quite so confused unless they heard a lot of the things that we're saying to them. Those of us who are supposed to be leaders, or at least those who put themselves in a position to say things to a lot of people. And you get more and more in the movement, kind of a decay of the real quality of honestness. I mean, you get journalism, you get all kinds of performances. I mean, and these kind of things are put out against the background of the deteriorating situation that we're in. And that doesn't really offer any explanation to people. I mean, but then on the other hand, you have a group of people beginning to address the question differently and to begin to see things like, you could just list the problem of jobs, the problem of education, and begin to draw some concrete analysis of that and outline some specific kinds of ways that people begin to function. So I just want to point out that you're really talking about two. One, capitalism, but two, and importantly, we haven't done anything to denounce capitalism unless we're able to devise some sensible way for us to organize ourselves to do that.
We have the largest ethnic group to condemn mixing with Black people. We've always been in the vanguard. We do that.
But there's a second dimension to what I was raising. That's the one you didn't address.
No, but I think we must see it positive, because I think it's undeniable that the desire for unity is more intense in the Black community today than it was yesterday, and will be more intense tomorrow. We must always see our movement as a progression. We understand there are negative factors in it, but we must look at the positive. We are more united. Understood, but
I don't think that we can sit here and say that, unity, is growing, without ourselves addressing some of the factors that explain the disunion.
But it is growing.
May I use the prerogative of the microphone? Just 1 second, please. We have a number of questions, and we certainly want to have free exchange, but if we could limit our responses to responses and not speeches, then we can all have more time, and if we could do that. But I don't want to stifle anyone, but I do want to, we can move. I think the mayor is next, and then the congressman. Maybe we proceed that way.
The mayor,
Let me just say this. I really do not see it as being a question of capitalism versus communism or socialism or any other form of government. I think we have to be pragmatic about what we're talking about. You're talking about living under a system that is committed to capitalism. It's not going to change to communism, socialism, or any other form of government. So what do you say, what do you do when you're the oppressed, the repressed under the capitalistic form of government? You examine the system and you see how can you make changes in that system. Now, one thing that everyone seems to have forgotten here tonight is that what you're talking about in the capitalistic form of government is power. It's the only thing that this country responds to is power. Economic power and political power. And the only time that the system reacts is when you've got some of that power. And as Black people, we're not going to be able to overcome the capitalistic form of system unless you do acquire both economic and political power, as every other ethnic group in this country has done. Obviously, I think the thrust in the 70s is in that direction. I think that Black communities are demonstrating greater sophistication towards the fact that they're going to change the system. They have to do it and work within them. They have to do it by acquiring power in both of those realms.
There's no question about the necessity of power to do anything. It's axiomatic. I mean, if we're talking about anything, I think the question is that the interest in which the power is best has to be a little bit more precisely defined. Even within the context of our own community and the use of that power by various groups within the community. And I think there again we raise the essential question, because there is a degree of power that we have, and there's a good deal of disagreement over the way that power is being used.
Go back to the point that Blue mentioned, what we generally do is we get caught up in an awful lot of theoretical question about how you change things, and we're really based on a very fundamental problem. Whatever change is going to come about, it's going to take some time. And rather than getting involved in dealing with the hereafter, I think we got to deal with it here and now. And that is the fact that most situations, if not all that we do, are economic situations in terms of black and poor people. Going back to the 60s, we participated in bringing about social change, which sort of made us legitimate people in the eyes of the law. Well, we've gone through that now. We've got probably on the books as many rights as anybody else, except we can't enjoy it. Versus the fact that there's no economics in our pocket to allow us to do that. We can now go to the law and we may not buy them, which is part of the 90+ kind of thing. What has to happen, I think, is that people got to pull themselves into a group function, back to what Lou said, as an economic bloc first. Secondarily, as a political bloc. And that calls for making all kinds of coalitions that I think, as the chairman of the caucus stated one time, it's a coalition of convenience, because there are other groups in the society who may not be as oppressed as blacks, but are certainly as without as blacks. And I think around economic interest, around the development of political power, you can develop a philosophy that is neither communistic, socialist, or capitalist, but the portion of pragmatic politics to acquire change. Did you want to say?
Tony, I've watched there are times, even such as this, number of blacks getting together to either are leaders or purport to be leaders, and their discussions, and we get off to the philosophical discussions of where we're going. And we began today by saying that we are not necessarily the black leaders, not necessarily, if we are not the black leaders of America. We are persons who are sitting here. But I talked about unity, a number of us have talked about unity. It is a hope for thing. But let me just tell you that one of the things I really hope for, I come from a background, a family moving towards socialism, who would like to see a socialist economy, but do live in a capitalistic society, would like to see changes take place. But one of the things I want most of all, which I should like to see moving towards black unity, sometimes I think it is happening, and that is that black people who have different philosophies can discuss those philosophies. Each of us do that which we think is necessary to meet the common need. Those of us who wish to move towards socialism talk about socialism and not find the necessity in the course of propagating our philosophy, whether it's capitalism, socialism, nationalism, whatever it is, not find the necessity to destroy other persons who are giving leadership in their arena. This is a much needed thing. I've not seen the attack here today, but it is something that I think troubles a number of persons who are looking for leadership.
Okay, one response from Mr. Williams, and then we'll have to move to the next question.
On the point that first dealing with the question of unity, that I'm firmly convinced that we run the danger of falling into a trick bag when we concentrate on when we devote so much attention to what the white man has to find as unity, that it seems to me that we've got to find unity among ourselves. That that a person can deal with one thing, but we'll deal with another thing. But I don't think that we have to get into the bag that we have one spokesman speaking with black people, two spokesmen. That each of us has our own thing, and the white community has yet not been able to deal with it. The hate people are asking what the black folks want. Well, I really don't know what all black folks want. I know what I want, but I think that we've got to realize that unity can exist at times, but it isn't necessary for all of us to be talking the same words, the same tone of voice all the time. That just won't work. That when we deal with that ourselves, that we can get it together. But if we fall into the bag that I've got to follow somebody because they're the leader, that's not going to work.
You're not suggesting that I'm implying that
no.
we all ought to follow one leader.
No, I'm not sure.
Because I'm very annoyed by the suggestion that we ought to have one leader.
That's right.
I wouldn't be opposed to it. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I would not be opposed to it. All America is Nixon and all China is Mao. I wouldn't be opposed to it at all. All Africa and all.
As far as I can vote for who my leader would be.
Oh, there's no problem. As long as it's representing the interests of the people.
I can vote for him also.
Yeah, you can vote for him. But we've seen, for example, in electoral politics, how jive it is. Because we've just seen that Nixon has been elected because of maneuvering and tricks and a lot of nonsense. We've just seen that.
So what I'm really talking about is the political aspect. I'm really saying that I'll have some actual choice. I'm not contrasting this with any other system.
I know you will, because the reasons America always makes it look like that system, you don't have these freedoms that America has, freedom to vote, freedom to do this, freedom to do that.
Freedom to starve.
Exactly, I was coming to the rest of those things.
Thank you. May we have the next question, please?
The name is Diallo, Diallo, Mahmoud, Mahmoud. And I'm calling from Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And my question is to Dr. Kamaka, to Angela Davis, and to President Nixon's special advisor, whom I cannot recall the name. Okay. I want to know how they feel about psychiatrist Francis Weston's theory of.
Excuse me, would you be kind for the $1.05 for the last 5 minutes?
Okay, I will, please. Hello? Yeah. Could you let me finish my question before?
Well, we have to collect for, for 5 minutes. You're not being charged for collect.
Okay. What's that?
$1.05.
In Cuba, telephones are free.
Sorry about that interruption. That's okay. It's Diallo Mahmoud from Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And Francis Weston, who is a psychiatrist, had an interview with Black Journal about 3 weeks ago. And she has developed an attractive theory of black superiority over white people.
Brother, would you just give me your question, please?
Okay, and my question is how did Dr. Kamaka, Angela Davis, and President Nixon's advisor feel about this theory? And do they agree or disagree with it, and why?
Let me attempt to paraphrase that. First of all, for the caller, as I stated, President Nixon's advisor was unable to be here. However, Mr. Carmichael and Ms. Davis might want to respond. He's referring to Dr. Francis Welsing, who is a black psychiatrist, who says that white racism is due to the fact that whites do not hate blacks because blacks are black. Whites hate blacks because whites are not black. And that racism is a reaction formation to something that you can't be and can't have. And that the state of whiteness is, in essence, a state of genetic deficiency and a state of albinism.
Well, first of all, I would say that in trying to understand what racism is all about, we have to look at history. Because as any other institution, racism is a historical phenomenon. And it developed in conjunction with the development of capitalism. You look at this country in particular, you see that the whole ideological network of racism arose in order to justify the use of black slaves, the kidnapping of black people from Africa and the use of black slaves in order to lay the basis for an agricultural capitalism in the South, and then eventually in order to provide for the capitalist system in this country, a group of people who could be super exploited, who could be used as a reserve labor force. And I think it's important to recognize the fact that the reason why those who presume to be the leaders of this country have resorted so consistently to racism is because of the fact that it assists the ruling class to reap more profits. Let me just give you an example. If you look at the wage differential of black workers and white workers, you have something like $21 billion. If you add Chicanos and Indians and Puerto Ricans and other people of color, you get about $28 billion. Now that $28 billion means a lot to the capitalist. But racism also serves another purpose. I think it's important to understand this. Racism is used by the rulers of this country in order to convince white people who are also, the masses of white people are also exploited. They are exploited as we are, and they are not, there is a qualitative difference in the sense that we are racially and nationally oppressed as white people. Not the white people, the masses of white people are working people, and the fruits of their labor are robbed by the capitalists. But you see, when the worker is focusing all of his attention, the white worker, on black people, and when he thinks that the reason why he is now unemployed is because of the fact that there's a system which gives black people in certain industries job priorities, and when Nixon and all of the others are able to sit white workers on black workers, then they have created a situation where the white worker is not even going to think about the fact that he's being exploited by the capitalists. I mean, I think that the whole question of dividing and ruling has been one of the ways in which the oppressors historically have most efficiently dominated. Racism serves the ruling class in precisely that way. And I think that right now, in this country today, racism is got the fundamental question we're facing. And white people have to understand it. White people have to understand that they have to wage on their own initiative a struggle against the racism which is also used in order to make it in order to facilitate their own exploitation by those who dominate this country.
What would you like to respond?
Well, I would say that I imagine that my sister Frances had a lot of examples and certain documentary facts to back up his word. I wouldn't get into disagreeing or agreeing with her. What I would ask is, how do you destroy it? While that may be the major problem, granted that, let's say that is the major problem, white people are able to enforce racism through capitalism. That's how they amass their power. And racism is really a question of power. That's all it is. It's whether or not one race has more power to take punishment on the other. For example, if a white boy wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If he lynches me, it's my problem. Thus, it behooves me to build as much power as I can to protect myself against racism and also to destroy the base that gives the racist the reality, the power reality to lynch me or to inflict power upon me. He amasses that through capitalism. Thus, it's my job to thoroughly dismantle that system, which will render him powerless. And once he's rendered powerless, then perhaps we can begin to deal with the question. I would again, the question of, there's no doubt that the major problem that the black man faces all over the world is the problem of economic exploitation. That's the core question. The answer is, how do you get to it? I know that the only way you can get to it is through politics. You must first politically organize before you can amass the economic power.
Maybe we take two quick responses from Judge Booth and
I just want to say that much of the attack here today, this evening, has been on Nixon. And I think everybody should know that we're not just on Nixon, we're on the entire society, the entire system as it operates. And I have had a chance to go to South Africa and Namibia on a couple of occasions. I've seen how our government, not just the president, but the Congress, the courts, and everything else, our government is sponsoring the racist regime in South Africa and in Namibia. I don't know, I think the media is responsible to a great degree because the media of this country, the press, television, radio, magazines, all of it, have kept from the American public the link between South Africa and the United States. I've found in my dealings in American City and Africa and otherwise that, for example, our Defense Department permits the South African Post Office to use our tracking station in Pretoria, South Africa, for communication purposes. And for communication purposes, in order to deal with the black people of South Africa who are now rising up. There is a war on all of Southern Africa, and the United States is helping the racist regime there to win the war against black folks by permitting free of charge, the South African Post Office to pack in to our tracking station in Pretoria. We are using the American government, and all the American people, and the only American tax dollars to help raise it from there. We likewise are sending ships, airplanes to Portugal, so they can use them against black people in Angola and Mozambique. We're doing a great deal of these kinds of things. We're selling herbicides, and we're covering it up by selling these things to private companies, which in turn turn it over to the government and use them against black people in South Africa. And I think that maybe we ought to try to get these facts across to the American people, and particularly to the black American people, so that they can use them to dismantle if you want to. It looks ugly. You go your way. And I think we can go different ways we want to, but we got to recognize we've got the same goal. And however way we each of them go, we ought to recognize we do have similar goals. We can work for the same end.
So I've always been for the unity in the black community, will always be for it. Our party, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, has been calling for a Black United Front, the meetings of all black people, irrespective of ideology. We want our people free. Thus, for example, I think this is very beautiful. It's unfortunate we can't get this unless someone calls us to be on TV. But I've always been for that. I learned that from Dr. King and from Malcolm X.
The newest Black Power Conference, of course, 67 and all the rest, since then, have indicated the same kind of thing.
Maybe we have a response from Mr. Sutton.
I think honed in was whether or not one agreed with the philosophy that racism, white racism, is an anger on the part of whites because they're not black. I don't think that at all. I quite agree with my sister Angela Davis that racism is really a matter of exploitation. It's an economic thing, and whether it's in South Africa or South United States or Northern United States, it is a method of exploitation, and exploitation does not really benefit the whites. That is not the right word.
Maybe I did disservice in, and I'm sure I did now, in recalling the theory, because what Dr. Welsing said was that race was the dynamic around which the political and the social system would organize to oppress black. Yes. Yes, it does make a difference. Okay, can we have a short remark and then take the next question? No.
Yeah, my comment was on the same question. And I think it's important in terms of the solution or the approach to solving the problem, created by racism, that we come to some clarification again on what it is and where it comes from. And I'm referring to Stokely's comments about, that perhaps was not central. And I'm saying that you can't really devise a strategy to begin to deal with the problem of racism in the society without a comprehension of its source, because and why it's there, where it comes from, the motive forces that created it. And again, I think that leads us back to what Angela said as a point of departure, in our efforts to dismantle racism.
All right. Next question, please.
Robert Alexander, San Antonio, Texas. Is it possible to persuade existing Black organizations to assign appropriate staff from each of these organizations to convene and develop for presentation a cogent list of priorities? Would it be possible, once this list of priorities has been developed, to utilize the network of organizational units such as NACP, Urban League, NCOC, CORE, so forth, and the Black colleges in this country to verify this list of priorities as being relevant to our cause, and then to rally the Blacks in this country to begin promoting the activities at the local, state, and national level to culminate at the national agenda by 1976, the 200th anniversary of the birth of our country.
Difficulty hearing, I will restate his question. Is it possible to persuade existing Black organizations to assign appropriate staffs from each of these organizations to convene and develop for presentation a cogent list of priorities? Would it be possible, once this list of priorities has been developed, to utilize the network of organizational units such as NAACP, Urban League, SCLC, CORE, so forth, and the Black colleges in this country to verify this list of priorities and being relevant to our cause, and then to rally the blacks in this country to begin promoting the activities at the local, state, and national levels to culminate as a national agenda by 1976, the 200th anniversary of the birth of our country.
And then to rally the blacks.
I think the gentleman's suggestion has merit. What he is in effect talking about is coalitions within the black community itself. When we talk politically, being able to acquire a real political power, we talk in terms of coalitions. But white people, black people, Puerto Ricans, Chicanos, white liberals, poor whites all together, and you, through this process, you acquire political power. And it seems to me that when you talk in terms of being able to form coalition between the races, obviously you ought to be able to form a coalition within the race in terms of unity for the race. So I think the gentleman has merit and that it could well be explored.
That's what they're doing with the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, although it's kind of failed, it seems, in recent years, also in the Black Political Assembly, and there are other attempts that have been made. I think what he's saying is that we've got to make it work, and that's our function.
As I said, he's asking for something I think a little more sophisticated than what has presently been attempted, and that is to come up with the priorities and then put it in the hands of people who are professional thinkers, and then establish the priorities, and then come back to the leadership, organizational leadership, and have a goals and objects for 1976. Some sophisticated.
National goals and national priorities there since Niagara Conference to Gary. I think the basic kinds of issues that the black and poor community is faced with, everybody accepts as priorities. So if we're talking about make that a national goal for 1976, they have been the national goal at least since I was.
Well, are you satisfied with the implementation?
Everybody accepts. No, we're talking about satisfied make that a national goal in 1976. They have only national goal that we sit ourselves in the United States. So we go back and come back with data and what happened, and we sit down and all agree that those are the.
But he gives a cutoff date. He says 1976.
I'd like to get it more.
There are very few holes in his question.
Cutoff date is yesterday or tomorrow.
Well, in terms of realism, we have not solved our problems to this day, and he's asking for black leaders, black organizations to give him some plan and give him some date for completion of this work.
Let me address a very important point, though. The Gary Convention came out with a set of listed priorities, whether we agree or disagree, those conditions exist in certain places. The Congressional Black Caucus, who after a number of exhaustive hearings involving all parts of community thinking, came down also with a list of priorities, which was addressed to the National Congress in their State of the Nation message, I believe, in the earlier part of the country. Now, anybody who takes a look at what was said there recognizes these to be problems. I don't see the need to have some sort of convening again of black leadership. I mean, part of our problem, Tony, is that we traditionally convene leadership and forget to convene people.
Let me be the devil's advocate. Here we are sitting, and perhaps some of you feel a little nervous about being called leaders, but you are, because the term has been stigmatized, and I can understand it. But let's be practical. Here is Mrs. Hamer, who is in the middle of Mississippi. They have a farm corporation. Their farmland, their cotton is underwater. They're starving. Now, what actually do organizations do specifically? 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you send 4 loaves of bread and two ham hocks? Do you go down and, I mean, in terms of saying, well, yes, our brothers and sisters in the rural South are starving. That's an abstract. Now, what do we do? How do we move from nothing to one? This is, I think, the substance of what this brother is asking. I just don't see it not being a legitimate concern.
I understand. Let's talk about a disaster situation. When we talk about the federal government as the institution that relieves that disaster, our local government. What I'm saying is that there is a clear procedure to follow in that situation. For instance, our illustrious leader has declared certain parts of it a disaster. So fine, the machinery of the Red Cross or whoever cranks up and does.
But if they had been Jews, the national Jewish community would have fed. Israel would have ate. This is, we say on one hand,
you go, bro.
We can't depend on the federal government. Then when a black person's in trouble,
We talk about the federal government. Yup.
Example is that in the past, when we have had disaster areas in the South, in particular, the federal government has acted in discriminatory fashion administering disaster aid. And one of the things that was needed then was close monitoring by a concerned black community, by skilled black people to go in and at first address the immediate problems that people had, as well to make the federal government live up to the standards that it had initiated for itself.
Not only that, I think that many times we don't understand that unity is a struggle. Because when the black man tries to unify, it is obvious and expected and understood that the white power structure of this country does not want that to happen. Because they move in many different ways, not covert, but rather covered to keep the black people divided. Because we have a responsibility. If we tried last year, we didn't do it. We tried the year before, we will keep trying because we got to do it. We got to do it.
What is the alternative?
And the other question is that on the question of leaders versus people, it is just a simple systematic way of organizing. You represent the state, county, federal, municipal employees. That's a large number of black people in this country and other people, okay? But a large number of black people, undeniably so. You represent that sector. Brother Nelson represents your group, which is an organizing group that's all over the country. That's the sector that he represents. The Honorable Percy Sutton, our brother here, represents Harlem. That's a fact. Brother Stokes represents a constituency in Ohio. That's a fact. If these people sit down and come together, they will create an atmosphere in which your constituency, his constituency will now be inspired to come together. Thus, we have to understand what it's about. Just bringing the leaders together is to set an atmosphere of unity. Because when your constituency, when Brother Sutton's constituency, when Brother Stokes' constituency look up to those who they see as national leaders, they see them divided. Thus, it demobilizes them. But if they saw us in constant contact, they would be inspired, unless we would speed up the process of organizing the very people.
But it's important, because I was not saying, I remarks short. I was not saying that leaders should not come together. My concern is to not become bogged down in 4 or 5 years of trying to determine priorities. For instance, when the administration came in with their wage price guidelines, more wage control, that was an instant kind of thing that poor people were confronted with. Not rich people, not doctors, not bankers, where interest rates, profit, but wages. I'm saying that we've got to be prepared to deal with that. For instance, the power pumps in the country immediately moved steel workers, auto workers, whoever was necessary to relieve the pressure from their people, they could move to get themselves exempted or excluded.
We must be unified.
It's not necessary to be unified, it must be powerful.
All right, thank
Well,
you.
you're gonna get power from unity.
Brother Sutton,
We're gonna get this.
Tony, you pointed out just then with regard to the Jewish community, that had there happened within the realm of the interest of the Jewish community, that which happens, and you're mentioning in Mississippi to Fannie Lou Hamer, there would have been a different response. We're talking about monitoring the federal government in what it gives. And the Jewish community would have been talking about monitoring the federal government in what it gives, but also in themselves doing something. We have not reached that point in our development. And it goes back to what Angela Davis had said. It is all economic, because until we're able to organize ourselves in whatever movement we have, whatever philosophy we have, to move economically, to structure the brother or sister. The brother or sister is not going to listen to you or to any of us unless we can change the condition of his life, either create a socialist system for him or make his life better in the capitalist system.
Would you accept the Nation of Islam as an example of that?
As an example of what?
As an example of blacks developing the second statement in your analysis.
Yeah, I think, let me just say this, I think the Nation of Islam moves towards what I should like to see. It moves towards doing something for the economic side of black people. Unfortunately, it has not had the impact many of us would wish it would have. And I guess the reason it has not had that impact is because there are not yet a sufficient number of believers. I think Charles and Mary Beard said many years ago, the problem with regard to the white work in America is that it was not sufficiently class conscious. I think the problem with black people in America is that we're not sufficiently class conscious. We still keep believing that we're going to make it in the system.
Brother Williams.
The problem of, I want to get back to that question, the problem of setting priorities or developing a national black agenda, I don't think is a difficult one for black people and black groups. I think that the difficulty lies whenever we begin or attempt to implement these agendas and priorities. And here has been our ideological differences began to interfere with our ability to function as a collective group. Now, the question also of unity, I think that we must understand that we are a large group of people, something like 40 to 50 million in this country, and there are going to always be differences of opinion. I think our primary concern should be developing some kind of mechanism for operational unity. In other words, when we come up with that national black agenda, with those priorities, then we, despite our different ideologies, should have that kind of mechanism that will embrace all these ideologies so that we can implement the national black agenda. And I think that here where we break down as a collective group, and that can be clearly seen right now in terms of our different political ideologies. Now, for instance, we are constantly loyal to the Democratic Party. We are constantly dampering with the Republican Party. We are constantly we are maintaining a permanent coalition with the white race of unions that is one of our greatest enemies in this particular country in terms of keeping black people out of the union, subsequently keeping them unemployed. And I think as black people, you see, if we were to come together, it would be a big argument as to where our loyalties should lie. It will not be with our black goals and objectives, be because of these various attachments that we have. And I think that until we develop to the point where our loyalty will be with black people, instead of our affiliation with any other group, we see that as a tactic and a strategy. And do not let this deter us. I think we need to be more effective in implementing the concept.
We must move on. We are running short of time, and I will plead for one more time for us to please make our remarks very cogent and not get into, because I know all of you are very gifted with respect. Congressman Stokes,
I just want to add one additional point to what my brother here just said. Someone a few moments ago mentioned the Jewish people. Now, they may differ ideologically or philosophically about many things. The one thing they all agree upon is Islam. It seems to me that the lesson in that for black people.
That's not okay, but all right, that's not maybe maybe have a comment, and then I think we do owe it to those who have phoned in questions to try to handle those questions out of courtesy. So could we very expeditiously move toward that? And Mr. Williams, you can try to make a point.
Just one point that I hope your viewers don't get the impression from what's been said so far that there is no cooperation with the black community. Because I think that they might feel that way. But all of us are doing our own thing, and we never relate to one another. And I've gotten says, that we do cooperate, we do form coalitions. So, it isn't as splendid as it might appear.
But if we don't form coalitions, one has been formed for us.
Well, yeah, by word.
That's what I've said many times. I think we've got something going. And the buck that has caused us to get into those hotels and have those meetings and caucuses and seminars and all the rest has come from the white community without our knowledge sometimes, without the knowledge of some of us. And so therefore the conference takes a tack that is totally different. And also splits us up too because of our ideology. Makes us think about ourselves as being different. We're not. Got a great deal of work with.
We're gonna have one short remark from Ms. Burrell and we'll go to the next question.
I think one of the things that needs to be said, Tony, is the fact that political power and the ownership of capital seem somehow to be handmaidens. I think we agreed. I think I've heard that about 4 times. Well, if that's true, then you decide which one of those comes first. I'm sure that you better have some money before the political power comes. I think that's what Congressman talked about a little bit earlier. Two old ladies in tennis shoes that get 20,000 votes for a candidate don't have access to it. But some guy that gave $20,000 does. And that's the difference. And it comes as a result of the ownership of business. If we're talking about the ownership of capital, then that gets to be important. And all capitalists don't have to own a little grocery store. I mean, there's a broad middle class in this country.
They're not capital.
Mr. Sutton said they could get the CEO. Okay, thank you. May we have the next question, please?
My name is Kwame Ture Fannie. I live in San Francisco. And my question was, with the war ending in Vietnam and unemployment, the rate of unemployment declining as it has, does anyone on the panel see possibility of race riots occurring across the country?
The question was, with the war in Vietnam ending and unemployment, I assume rising, the rate of unemployment climbing as it has, does anyone see the possibility of race riots occurring across the country?
The potential is here. We've put all this money for so many years into Vietnam, fighting a war in a place that we shouldn't be fighting, intervening in a civil disagreement is really what it is there, and yet doing nothing to structure people as they come back here. Grand unemployment with the Nixon administration leading in an attitude to continue to do nothing, cutbacks all along the line. Right here in the city of New York, just recently, I think we might have had a riot where a policeman shot a 10-year-old boy in the back. There was great disorder in the vicinity of the house in which the youngster lived. The Nixon administration continues its cutback, and had this been summertime when that youngster was shot in the back, I think you might have found a riot right here.
Let me clarify the fine language of this question. And the question said race riots. It doesn't, this question doesn't say the rebellions of the 60s in which blacks were burning up their own houses and, robbing liquor stores.
No, let me carry on. Let me respond to that. I don't think if we have riots again, I think blacks are much more sophisticated than we were in the early 60s and much more bold than we were in the early 60s. And I don't think that disorders are going to be confined to black communities. A lot of brothers and sisters who are much more bold than before who will carry the disorders, if we want to turn that, into the white community, to the downtown banks, to where the power structure is. Yes, I think there's a grand possibility of disorder and race riots. I would hope not.
I think that we have a responsibility, because no doubt the atmosphere is that we have a responsibility to construct that consciousness that will now rise and to guide in whatever channels we see, irrespective of whether we say we're valid or not valid. I think we do have a responsibility to try and channel that.
Because while we can agree on an increase in racism, and I think it would be inappropriate to draw the conclusion that will manifest itself in race riots. And in fact, it becomes our responsibility to work to make sure it does not.
Let's see if I understood the question, whether there was a possibility.
Yes.
And my answer, yes, was a possibility.
Well, I agree with you.
As related to unemployment,
an obligation.
right.
Of course.
A responsibility to channel it, that I can take different forms.
It's things that I really don't understand about that war, because I've never seen the war end and people still shoot. Now, I don't understand that. When they make that clear to me, then I really want somebody to clarify that. Because, and number two, I couldn't understand why so many black men were sent over there to fight, and everybody I seen talking, they got off and playing as white men. It's just a lot of things that I don't understand about that. This is enough to make people upset, because that upset me. That upset other people, because I do know that it was more than white people went to Vietnam. And I know that, somebody else should have been, it was two things that really upset a lot of people in the South. And I can't understand, if the war is over and the prisoner is home, why they still shoot.
I think the point is clear. The war in Southeast Asia is still going on, but as well, there is now an increased war here at home in terms of the conditions that people are having to live under, the conditions that returning veterans are having to face. As part of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, I traveled in Asia very recently. I talked to many of the black servicemen and women in the brigs and stockades and the courts, and talked to them in their barracks. And I checked out as well the situation here in the United States, people who are about to be released under administrative discharges and a whole range of less than honorable discharges that the system has put upon these people. And I think that not only do we have to take Sister Hammer's point about the war going on in Southeast Asia, but the war going on right here in the United States, in terms of the conditions that these people are going to have to face when they come out, and the kind of lives that they're going to be forced to live. And I think that has implications not only for the black community, but for the entire American community.
I'd just like to say the thing that war was going on when we got there. They were shooting when we got there, and now that we've left, they're still shooting. And I wish we left that part out that comes in between. I wish we never joined the shooting. Let's let them keep on shooting like they're doing now.
It's capitalism in sentence.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
I didn't do it.
Mrs. Hammond's point is that they have not really done.
Let me have the next question, please.
My name is Ronald Whitson from Brooklyn, New York. Question is, I want to know, would it be feasible and would it be much more beneficial to black people if we had, as we say we have, a home to call our home, like Africa, like we could relate to our brothers in Africa, as do the Jews do to Israel? Would this give us more of a nation kind of feeling than the direction we are now presently taking in this country?
I think, Mr. Carmichael, we're all waiting on you to answer that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My brother, I thank you. Africa is our home. Africa is our mother. Undeniably, it is our home. I think that we get confused, and that's why our struggle becomes so confused, because a nationalist free awakening is a necessity for anti-imperialist struggle. All countries go through their nationalist stage before they go into that serious, the Vietnamese, the Chinese, the Cubans. And our problem is that we don't really understand nationalism. When you say nation, you talk about land. Our land is Africa. That's undeniable. This land is not our land. This land is not our land. This land is not the white man's land. He's just a European settler on this land. This land is the red man's land. And the red man will raise contradictions to get his land back. And when it does, black people have to be crystal clear what our position is. The red man fighting in Wounded Knee right now, our position can only be but one. We support him to reclaim his land, while we also wage our struggle to take back our land. Now, the way people now ask the question, well, Brother Stokely, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to leave America and go to Africa? I think that's an incorrect way of phrasing the question. Once we understand that Africa is our home, then the way we raise the question is, Brother Stokely, I'm in America. What can I do to help home? Once the question is raised that way, then we see it more clearly. But it's undeniable that when you fight revolution, you fight for land. You fight for land.
We'll try to get to another question. Next question, please.
My name is Deidre Carter, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And my question is on census taking and the fact that from 1900 to 1970, according to the World Almanac, the Negro Almanac, and census, why we have still remained 10% to 11% of the total population. And exactly who is the minority on a national and an international scale?
Thank you very much.
She was asking, in essence, are we the minority or the majority on an international scale?
Right here where we are, we're in the minority, but we may be as a part of black people, brown people, we're a majority.
Next question.
Black people, we're the majority.
I think we have time for one more question. We have a birth.
My name is Osoto Lewis. You got that? Yes. And one of the questions is directed to Stokely Carmichael.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, how can you be in Africa and America at the same time?
Could you answer that very succinctly? I'm sure it's a
Very short answer. Very simple. When I was in Africa for the last 4 years, my mother was in America and she was in Trinidad. But she's my mother. I have a responsibility to take care of her. I took care of my mother wherever she was. For my brother, I would tell him that he should read the works of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And he will see that the Honorable Marcus Garvey never saw Africa, never saw it. Yet it is undeniable that the Honorable Marcus Garvey worked harder for Africa than any man in his lifetime during that period, and he never saw it.
We have a few seconds. Angela, let me ask you, what is your involvement now in the political prisoners movement specifically? We have about a half a minute.
Well, we are trying to build a movement embracing all of those thousands and tens of thousands who support me, as well as anybody else who can see the need to free more political prisoners and victims of political repression. We're talking about fighting around the case of Rochelle McGee, San Quentin 6, Carlos Feliciano, Ralph Brown, right here in New York. I was visiting just a few days ago, Rochelle McGee in San Quentin.
I hate to interrupt you. I feel like the bad guy on this program, but it's been very interesting, and I'm sure the audience has gotten some tremendous insights like John, would like to thank you for coming and giving us your ability and your wisdom.
Well, we thank you for helping to bring us together. Even on this level, it will now inspire us to work harder to unite amongst ourselves.
Amen, brother.